I'd like to thank you all for having me here today. You've had me here quite a bit, and you're probably quite tired of me. However, I do have an issue that I think I'm absolutely passionate about, an issue that I've just learned about in the last 6 months. And it's a funny thing because I do, as most of you probably know, I do tons of work in the field of elder abuse and neglect. This couple here are the Piccolo family, Teresa and Frank Piccolo. I need to speak up. Sorry. Whoops. Frank and Teresa Piccolo came to my attention via CTV, if you can believe, via Sandy Ronaldo, via a team of CTV that from W5, which ascended on my office, which is very, very tiny and not beautiful like this, and began to show me horrendous pictures of death in a nursing home. And this is death that we're talking about that occurred before somebody's time. I know that you're going to talk about death tomorrow, I think, which is a good thing. This was a bad thing. Frank was a wonderful man. As you can see, he was a husband. As you can see, he had children. They had 3 children. Frank was beat up by the lady across the hall. If you can look at his wounds, I don't even have the worst pictures. There's much worse pictures where he was attacked by an activity board in his room by a lady across the hall. And Frank died very quickly thereafter. When I saw the scene, it honestly looked like a murder scene to me. And I started thinking, if I was in a nursing home, would I want the lady across the hall to come and kill me? Would I want to be frightened all the time of what is going on in my home? And I have to tell you, I became outraged when I saw this. And I became outraged when I spoke with Teresa, whose heart was broken, whose family was destroyed, who felt that she had given her husband the best possible care that she could ever provide for him, who visited him every single day, sometimes twice a day. She went to the police. The police did nothing. She wrote to the Minister of Health in Ontario. The minister said, oops, maybe we made a mistake. The director of the nursing home would not even speak with her to this day. So she has had absolutely no satisfaction in terms of what happened to her husband. This led me to recognize that for myself, I knew absolutely nothing about resident-to-resident abuse. And I'm sure, like all of you would know, resident-to-resident abuse simply means one residence in long-term care attacks another residence in long-term care. And that type of attack can be definitely physical, verbal, it can be psychological, it can be material, i.e. stealing stuff, and it can be sexual mistreatment. The types of abuse that we see in nursing homes basically is pushing, grabbing, shoving, hitting, pulling hair, assault with objects like the activity board that killed Frank, hitting people with your canes, hitting people with your walker, and running into people with your wheelchairs. Verbal abuse, I think anybody who works in a nursing home or long-term care realizes that there are some people who sit and yell 24/7 and they repeat the same thing over and over and over again. Then there are those who yell and curse at other people in the facility. A lot of that yelling can be very rude, such as ethnic slurs, religious slurs, and so on. The psychological abuse that goes on amongst residents in nursing homes is intimidation and threats. And the threats are like, I will kill you if you sit in my dining seat again. The threats are, I will get you tonight when you're sleeping. The sexual abuse, a lot of it is exposing oneself to other residents. Some of it is fondling. Some of it is getting in bed with other residents. material abuse is basically stealing other people's possessions. And when you live in a nursing home, the possessions become fewer and smaller. So the stealing somebody's food even becomes a cause for a fight. Because we knew nothing, maybe like we sit in our ivory tower contemplating our navels, and we didn't really know anything that was in the literature about this type of abuse. And I'll stop right here because Gloria stopped me in my tracks a couple days ago in Toronto and said to me, oh, resident to resident is not abuse because there is no trust relationship. And I thought about that for about 5 minutes. And I thought, you know, whether Gloria's right or not wrong, I don't know for sure, but I do know that I do not trust any of you to strangle me in the hallway after this. I do not feel that anyone's going to attack me in the women's washroom. I trust myself as a member of society, as a citizen in this society. If I live in a condominium in Toronto, I do not expect the person next door to take a gun to me. So there is a fundamental trust as citizens of a community that we all engage in. So that was my answer. I don't know if she agreed with me. The scoping review that we did was basically to find out all the literature that exists on resident to resident abuse so that we could understand what it was, what it looked like, and what the outcomes were, who the perpetrators were, and basically what was done about the problem. The inclusion criteria that we used was basically resident to resident elder abuse, and they had to be residing in a long-term care type of facility, or they had to be living in assisted care. We found 31 records, period, which is not very many. 25 of those were peer-reviewed journal articles. So in other words, we found 25 journal articles in the English language. We did find 6 gray pieces of literature, which were really theses. We found some theses on bullying. Older people, there seems to be a trend to start talking about bullying as the same thing as elder abuse. We also found some stuff on aggression in nursing homes, which did not go as far as physical abuse. We found basically mostly retrospective case reviews. We found interviews with staff and or residents. We followed, people just wrote commentaries basically saying this is really a bad thing. And we found one randomized cluster trial which measured intervention and what to do about the problem. The studies took place mainly in the United States, one in Canada, and one in the UK. And honestly, that's all we could find. 35 types of abuse, physical, verbal, sexual abuse were documented. And as I said, one study evaluated an intervention, and that was it. So, and I would say about this research, it's pretty weak research. We actually know very little. Tell me when I'm up. The key findings of the research, the thing that was the most amazing is that this form of abuse is highly, highly prevalent in nursing homes, and it causes a considerable amount of harm, and it costs a lot of money because most people end up in a medical hospital, and most people die. The most profound thing for me was that residents who experience resident-to-resident abuse are really worried for their security and safety, but they believe that resident-to-resident abuse is normal. That's the way it should be. And I think that is a very significant thought to hold. Why should it be normal? I also found one other study where the staff, mainly, do you call them personal care workers here? Yeah. The personal care worker said the very same thing. Well, what do you expect? This is what goes on in a nursing home, i.e., it's okay. The literature that we reviewed basically looked at most of the triggers, that what sets off a violent attack. It looked at what are the characteristics of the perpetrators, and what was actually the response on the part of older people themselves and on the staff themselves. What one of the most profound findings were, which would be no surprise to anybody here who works in a nursing home, is that the target resident or the victim usually had some type of cognitive problems. They were not totally aware. For example, Frank, who was murdered basically, had a very light dementia, which was on the downslide. Okay, the resident characteristics are, number one, as I've said, the person tends to be cognitively impaired, although they are physically independent. So Frank was very independent. He could wheel around the nursing home with absolutely no problem. His only communication impairment was that obviously he was confused sometimes as to where he was and where he was going. The person, who was the initiator, usually had what the staff would call a very strong personality. Social groups, as you know, develop in nursing homes, and some people become the natural leader, and they're very strong, they're the boss, and they run the show. A lot of the people who were engaged in resident-to-resident abuse had a very short fuse. They had absolutely no patience, and in fact there's even some films that aren't about abuse where you can see people running into each other with their wheelchairs because they want to be the first one in the dining room. A life history becomes extremely important here. And part of that life history is if the person had been prejudicial against race, if they'd been prejudiced against religion, that tended to show up again in many, many slurs which started many, many fights. The person who basically did the abusing tended to be far more cognitively aware than the person who was attacked. The triggers are what we would expect. Intrusion. In intrusion, the biggest one is wandering. People who wander into other people's rooms, wander in trying different people's beds, wander in rattling through their closets. Those people are invading somebody's space. The environment can be a problem in the sense that older people may have a nap in the afternoon, so they're up all night. And they're up all night, and perhaps they'll get into some type of a fight with another resident. The violence, there were a number of examples if an older person witnessed violence, say between a staff and an older person, the older person attacking the staff, they might turn around with their cane and hit the third person because they were really upset and they didn't know what to do. Roommates have a dreadful record. I know I had one with my roommate, but they have a dreadful record with turning the air conditioning up, turning the air conditioning down. You left the bathroom dirty. One woman couldn't stand the sound of another woman's oxygen tank, so she just disconnected it. Roommates have a lot of issues. There's lots of competition between people in a nursing home as to why did she get that and I didn't get that. She's got a bigger name on her door than I do, and so on. In terms of communication, most people cannot tolerate the constant, repetitive yelling and so on that you're aware of. Believe it or not, boredom was identified as one of the triggers that led other older people to hurt other older people. And that normally tended to happen around holidays at Christmas and Easter, when there wasn't as much staff and there wasn't as many activities and stuff happening. Hostile interactions can escalate. Impatience, I've already talked about. Jealousy. Some people have favorite PSWs and favorite nurses, and if that favorite nurse spends time with another resident, look out, there's trouble. Dementia, I've talked about, and of course there's the whole idea of being unprovoked. Sometimes there's no reason. Loneliness is also sometimes the cause or a trigger, because it obviously, I'm sorry, I have a cold, it basically garners attention. The abuse, as far as I can see, tends to happen a lot in the hallway, tends to happen a lot in residents' rooms. The dining hall is a lethal place for problems. If somebody dares take somebody else's seat, look out. And the same goes for the TV room, where they try to move people around and around and around so that there isn't a problem. Now, this all sounds really childish, but it's like human living that we're all engaged in. But if it happened here in this room, we wouldn't accept it. We would not accept it. The response is that the person tries to call for help. Frank, for example, this woman had been into his room already once that day and drilled him in the face. And he called for help. Nobody came. So the other way that sometimes older people handle the situation is that they just handle it alone, or they avoid the aggressive person, and they'll go miles out of their way. They'll have staff roll them around in their wheelchair way out of their way to get to a point that would have taken them 2 minutes to get there, but they want to avoid the aggressive person. In terms of what staff do the best they can. They verbally intervene. They separate residents. Often they call social services, and often they do nothing. In the case of Frank, they did nothing the first time in the day, and the second time in the day he was dead. It's an interesting finding in one study where they found that resident-to-resident abuse victims are more likely to be neglected by the staff than other residents. And they didn't have a lot of reasons for that in the literature. Most injuries are to the head and the face and the upper extremities. Death is a common outcome. There is no doubt that there is a negative psychological impact on the victims, but there's also a negative psychological impact on the victims around that person. 2 rooms over, 1 room over. Just a couple weeks after Frank died, another woman killed another woman in a nursing home and roughed up another man, and the whole unit had to have a trauma counselor come in and work with them. Now, I don't know if anybody ever even thinks of that, but that's what they did at this one place, which I thought maybe was not a bad idea. The police are often consulted. The police often can't do anything. How do you charge someone who is slightly cognitively impaired who kills another cognitively impaired person? The police can't do anything. The nursing home normally, if I don't know what the law is, so here in BC, but in Ontario, the law, the new act, is that the nursing home facility, the administrator and board, is charged to protecting the safety of the older adult. That's where the responsibility actually lies. But for some reason, we never do much about it. Sexual abuse goes on more than you think. There basically 10 to 12% of sexual abuse victims receive physical or psychological help. In other words, they're ignored. And 15% of sexual assault victims and 15 to 30% of the perpetrators are relocated within the facility. The problem is when you relocate the offender, they just carry on in the next place. The only study that found that anything that worked was that the education of the staff led to more reporting. In other words, by saying to the staff, when you see this, this isn't normal, report it. And that's the best that they've done. One other study talked about the difference between using a client-centered approach, which you're all familiar with, as opposed to a provider-centered approach, which you're also familiar with. The provider-centered approach is it's all about you, the staff, and how everything works so that you can get your job done. What a number of writers are now saying that can't be the case. It's got to change. Anyway, the other point is that in designing nursing homes, which I think UBC's done a lot of good. Okay, yeah. BC's done a lot of good in designing excellent facilities for older people, and some of the things they're saying now is no more double rooms. They're really a bad idea. 4 rooms are a bad idea. 1 room is a better idea. Okay, we took the data from CTV. CTV had done an amazing thing. They had collected the health authority data, which they had to pay for, and they ran out of money. So what they actually ended up with was the total number of cases in Canada reported in nursing homes. This is reported data. In 2011 was 6,494 cases, or 28% of all the abuse cases. CTV, in their own calculations, which we didn't really agree with, came out and said there were 10,000 cases of resident-to-resident abuse in Canada in the year 2011. What we found by going through the provinces, we went back to the raw data, to every report. We tried to clean up the data. And what we found, that the percentage of resident-to-resident abuse ranged from 14% to 61%, depending on the jurisdiction. If you look just at BC, we got 4 of the health authorities out of the 6. So that we got half decent data, but this is not random data, so I'm not sure what it means. But we did get 4 out of the 6 authorities in British Columbia. If you look at BC again, there were 939 reports of abuse in long-term care. 389 of those cases were resident-to-resident abuse, which means 41% of the cases of abuse reported in those 4 jurisdictions in BC were resident-to-resident abuse. That's almost half. And I'm not going to go through all this because nobody cares, but the data is not great, and there's all kinds of reasons. So the most important message that I'd like to leave with you, that this is not normal. Although, we've all been brainwashed into it's normal because people all live together. It's not normal. Number 2, we don't have any good research in this country about it. Number 3, the rate is alarmingly high. It is very high. And one of the simple things that actually works, at least on one study, is staff education. So overall in Canada, we are estimating that 1/3 of the cases of abuse in institutions are resident-to-resident. This is Teresa. Teresa pickets every day in front of the nursing home. She's trying to do something. Thank you.
Well, good morning. Thank you very much, Dr. McDonald. My name is Elizabeth Drance. I'm a geriatric psychiatrist and have a real interest and passion for caring for people who are living in residential care environments and their families. And I thank Gloria for the opportunity to talk about this very important issue. And you'll notice that I am not going to use the word abuse. I am going to use the word resident aggression. And the reason that I do that is I try very hard. Abuse has a lot of value-laden terminology. It's a value-laden term. And while I think very much it is not normal to have resident aggression, it should not be normal, we do need to understand that resident aggression is a complex phenomenon. And I'll tell you why. It's where you have resident aggression, there's an overlap between factors that come from three different areas. Resident type factors, we have facility related factors, and we have the system of care and societal factors. So I'd like to just spend a little bit of time talking about what those factors are that go into the kinds of horrendous numbers that I couldn't agree more we need to do something about. So the resident factors, first that was mentioned, is the notion of cognitive impairment. And I agree that there's very little data on the actual topic itself. So you're talking to somebody who's drawing from a long sort of period of experience with this area. But cognitive impairment, when we talk about how frequent cognitive impairment is in the nursing home, the Canadian study on health and aging really showed us that only 13.1%, and this is in 1997, this is a long time ago now, only 13.1% of people who lived in long-term care at that time were cognitively well. That means that 87% of the people who live in long-term care have some degree of cognitive impairment. And about 30% of that is cognitive impairment, not dementia, or mild cognitive impairment, as you may know it. 56.9% had a dementia. And it's important that we acknowledge that both of those entities influence people's behavior. And the reason for that is that when you look at what causes people to actually require the 24-hour care environment, it's the fact that they actually have difficulties with their executive functioning. So what does that mean? Well, it means difficulties with their attention, difficulties with their working memory, difficulty with planning and initiating an activity and following it through, difficulties with forethought, thinking out a particular plan of action and putting it all together, and difficulties with impulse control. So when you hear about people in long-term care being impatient, a lot of this is related to the fact that their executive functions are not working well. And they may have been very impatient people as young individuals, and so we'll just go back to talking about the other issues. If someone, one of the other areas is medical and psychiatric illness. So if someone is clinically depressed, they also may have difficulties with their impulse control and their impatience. If they're in pain, physical pain that's not being well managed, or if they're feeling unwell, those are also contributions to just people behaving inappropriately with others. Personality factors, and Dr. McDonald touched on that. We all have personalities. And if you think about moving into a long-term care facility and how your particular personality is going to match, if you have to share a room with somebody, or if you have to line up to get into a dining room, or if you have so little attention that you become very focused on the little attention you do get from caregivers and become jealous of others. You know, all of us bring our personality into the nursing home environment. And we do know that people who have a short fuse to start with, who then develop a cognitive impairment, have a shorter fuse. And so we need to recognize, it's not to excuse the behavior, but it's to be able to say this is a risk factor for the kinds of behaviors that Dr. McDonald's been talking about. You mentioned also, Lynn, about life experiences. And we need to really understand the person's life and who they are as an individual. their trauma history, whether they themselves have been traumatized, whether they have been bullied as individuals, or whether they were bullies as younger individuals. How is their conflict resolution? What kind of skills do they have? What kind of skills have they had all their life? And how are they now able to interact and resolve issues? Were they very large people who were involved in contact sports like boxing or wrestling or football? You know, these are all things that when someone comes into a care facility, we need to be thinking about that before they join us, so that we can actually say, we need to support this person. They have some red flags. Doesn't mean they're going to actually become aggressive or show aggressive behavior, but it's our job in supporting that transition to recognize the people who are at risk and support them to have the kind of success in the environment, and to match them with the kind of environment where they're going to be successful. Facility factors are very interesting. The size of facilities, smaller facilities where people have shorter distances to walk, where they need adequate space, certainly corridors, Lynn mentioned. Corridors are a really difficult place for people because it's the place where your personal space often comes into conflict with another as you pass. And depending on your ability to understand what's going on in the environment, you may in fact misinterpret why someone is coming close to you with their walker and end up sort of trying to protect yourself. Environments that are overstimulating or understimulating. We know that people with cognitive impairment have a much harder time sorting through the stimuli that they experience. So if someone's in an environment where it's very noisy and people are calling out and they're having trouble understanding what someone's asking them to do, or someone approaches them, that kind of thing can cause them to feel very fearful, and it also causes them at times to respond in an inappropriate way. Understimulating environments, as Lynn mentioned, boredom is a challenge. We know that loneliness, helplessness, and boredom are three of the major challenges in long-term care environments. And boredom and loneliness will certainly cause people to feel depressed, to not function at their best, and at times to become more angry and frustrated. The culture of care, and we'll come back to this a little bit at the end, that Lynn also mentioned. In fact, Jessica Cohen-Mansfield, who's one of the best researchers in the area of behavioral challenges in long-term care, actually has shown that what people really need who have aggressive responses to situations is they need a very individualized plan of care. So you need to take all of these factors and the environment and put it together into a care plan that actually speaks from the person's perspective, what it is that they need. We can't fit round pegs into square holes continuously and expect it all to work out well. In terms of the culture of care, Lynn mentioned the institutional focused care. And really, that's the kind of care that has been traditionally offered in our nursing home environments, where we actually say, you are coming into our world. And these are the rules. And this is the way it's set up, and this is the activities we offer, so which ones do you fit into? And these are the people you're going to interact with, so make the best of it. And by the way, your bath will be Tuesday evening, because that's when the last person who died, that's when they had their bath. So these kinds of models that are very much missing the mark, that are focused on the needs of the institution, miss the fact that we're looking after people. And if we really understand the people who we're looking after, and if we work together as a community of care to plan care for them, with their families, then things can go a whole lot better. And in fact, what we're learning is that that's the key to safety in a care setting. The other thing that we need to talk about is the staff. And so the selection of staff is extremely important. Are people there because they're passionate about the work that they're doing, or are they there because they need a paycheck? And there's a mixture of people. And so we know that people who are really passionate about the care anticipate when things are going awry with individuals and work together, point out, to the nursing staff that they work with, that something's changing here. And they're really interested in what's going on as opposed to just sort of looking the other way. The numbers of staff, and I think we really need to not shy away from the fact that the complexity, as you're seeing just from this discussion, the complexity of people who come to live with us in residential care is escalating significantly. And our staffing levels are not necessarily matching that complexity. So I don't want to say that it's all about staffing, because if you get a whole bunch more staff and they do just what we've been doing traditionally, I'm not interested. But if we're going to have more staff that are actually providing person-centered care, we have a chance of making a huge difference and creating environments that are safe places and places where people will want to be. The mixture of staff is really important, our professional staff versus our practical nursing staff versus our care aid staff. That needs to be really carefully understood. The training and support, as Lynn mentioned, is key. So if you really understand the nature of the people you're caring for, and you really understand why it's important to care for Mary in a particular way and why that's going to create success for Joe, and knowing that Mary and Joe don't always get along, but here's how we're going to make this work the best that we can. If we train people in that process, we know that people have a much better outcome. The other big issue, and this is something actually that came out of Simon Fraser, is the notion of workplace wellness and the empowerment of our staff. So really, the more that we involve staff in the planning of what needs to happen to make an environment successful, we know that that makes a significant difference to the well-being of the people we're looking after. So those are some of the facility factors. The systems factors are they're huge, and they're challenging, and they're interesting. One is that our healthcare system and the components of that healthcare system have a very poor understanding of the residential care complexity. That's the complexity of the people that are being looked after in residential care. At the moment, we live in an environment that's all about moving people through an acute care setting. And so we push people out before they're perhaps ready to go. We hospitalize people who probably would do better if they weren't hospitalized. And the whole focus, unfortunately, is in sort of moving people out of the acute care setting and into residential care settings, which may or may not be the appropriate place for that individual. The other is that because of this change in our environment and the fact that we have many more older people, most of the people who had significant dementia were cared for years and years ago in that exact horrendous environment that you described, the old psychiatric hospital. But one of the challenges is that our nursing homes have become the new psychiatric hospital, but without the resources and the recognition that we need to do things differently to support the people who are living with us. The final thing, the second thing is residential care processes. So we have a lot of licensing requirements. We have a lot of MDS, minimal data set, important to get that information. But you need to remember that every time we add on another process, another practice guideline, another something, we're taking often our professional staff away from the people who need them the most and the interactions from those people. And so we need to be at least mindful of whatever processes we add on. You'll hear tomorrow about the fact that we really recognize that medications are not always and not necessarily often or need to be carefully used in supporting people who have behavioral issues. And we're recognizing that the non-pharmacological and the interpersonal and the relationship aspects of things are actually the way to address most behavioral issues in the nursing home. But what do these things require? They require knowledge, skill, numbers of people. They require people to have relationships with. And so I am completely in agreement that we should be doing things and avoiding the use of unnecessary medications. But to do that, we need to recognize what that's going to require. The third aspect is the fact that our society, and this is a big area of discussion that we can talk about at another point, but what is our society's view of elders who are physically frail and cognitively impaired? What's our view of them? Do we ghettoize them in long-term care facilities? Do we create communities where older people who are more frail want to live? Or are we just pushing them to the side. And these are the people who built this country. These are the people, you hear constantly about the silver tsunami that's coming, but we have a lot of, we need to recognize as a society, we have a lot to learn from elders. We have a lot to learn from our elders, and our goal is to engage and create new ways of supporting them so that they can also support us. So what do we have to do to address these various issues? So in the short term, as Dr. McDonald said, we have to push hard for a person-centered culture of care. And what does that actually look like? The Alzheimer's Society of Canada just completed a sort of a market research project where they went out and talked to lots of facilities that are well known for providing person-centered care. And Mary Schultz gave me permission to use her PC Pearls, which I think is just a great way of kind of capturing what person-centered care is. So P implies that we are actually providing care that's about the people that we're looking after. Oh, sorry, got a call. Just put that on. Sorry, I thought that was my time, but actually it's just a call. But if we provide care for the people that we're looking after, and we engage families in providing that information and the support to develop those care plans, then we provide good care. If the care is individualized, and if the care is provided by knowledgeable individuals, then we do well. If our processes have to be built in, so how we do our care planning, how we do our care conferencing, how we invite people into the facility, how we engage our family members in being key parts of that team. But if we don't have the processes, it relies only on personalities, and that's not going to last us for long. So we need to build in those processes. As Lynn mentioned, the environment. We have physical environments still where 4 people are sharing a room. It's unbelievable that we're still at that place. We have environments that are overstimulating. We know the kinds of environments where people with frailty and cognitive impairment do well. They're smaller, they're homey, they have short distances so I can maintain my mobility longer. They involve me in everyday activities in meaningful ways, but we're not yet getting there. Lynn also mentioned that some of these incidents occur when we have the least amount of activity and recreation. Some of the challenges around that are we have very little activity, or we have it all in big groups that just happen 3 or 4 times a day. And the small kind of things that you could be doing between those things where we engage people in sort of the real ways that we all are engaged daily don't necessarily happen. To get all this to happen, you need incredibly wise and brave leadership. You need people who understand the notion of empowering their staff. You need people who understand and really want to work alongside families and engage them. And they need training as well. So you don't need a lot of managers, you need true leaders. And finally, going back to the fact you need staffing. And you need the right number, you need the skill set, and you need an interest and passion for this work, because that's the only way you're going to get excellent care. And the mix, as I mentioned. So in the other part that is very spotty throughout the province and actually throughout the country is, what does mental health support look like for this population? If it's just me coming in with a prescription pad, not helpful entirely. I have a role to play, but it's a small role. But what we don't have are good behavioral supports that help build those plans and help coach the staff to really understand how we're going to prevent the challenges that arise. We also don't have great medical supports. We have very spotty family physician coverage, and again, as I mentioned, as long as people are physically ill, they're going to be often more frustrated and more at risk of behavioral challenge. And then finally, we need to support transitions into residential care. It's really not difficult. We have a person, they're waiting for a bed, they need some support. We could start right then. Who are you? What do you need? What's the plan? What's the best approach to the care? And then let's support you as you make that transition in. And especially when we see you're somebody who has the risk factors for being aggressive or being, for aggressive behavior. So supporting transitions into residential care is not beyond our scope and can be done in the short term. And in the longer term, we actually need to conduct some really significant conversations in our society regarding the value and the wisdom of our elders. I don't think we can put that off any longer. We need to really shift, and part of that is as the baby boomers age right now, they're really trying to say that, you know, everybody can stay young. Well, you know what? We can't. So we need to embrace the fact that we're going to get older. We need to embrace what older people have to teach us, and we need to do that sooner rather than later. And finally, we really need to create different kinds of living situations for frail elders, where their value is reflected and what they have to teach us is fully embraced. So we know it can be done, and I've seen it done, and we can do it well, but we must will it to be done, and we need to get on with it. Thank you.
We'd like to open the floor now for discussion. Sarah, could you please find out why the AV people haven't brought us a second floor mic? Sarah or Laura? There is a floor mic here, and there will be another one hopefully in the next couple of minutes. But please come up to the microphone and let us hear your views and your experiences.
Okay. Can I say something?
Yep.
Just what you said.
Do you want to say?
I never reported all the data, obviously, from the health authorities, but the biggest response of staff to the problem of resident-to-residence, what are you calling it, aggression? I'm calling it abuse because I think it's horrible.
So do I. I think it's horrible too. Please don't. I don't want to pretend that
doesn't matter. But what I want to say is that out of the data that we analyzed, 60% of the response was medication, if you can believe. And the other thing, though, that is really hopeful that I never mentioned is that Ontario doesn't always do really great things, but they just did one good thing. They established what they call behavioral support teams by the federal government. And your nursing home could call out your behavior support team to come and deal with exactly these issues. And one nursing home, Trinity in Kitchener, Ontario, decided, you know what, we're just going to hire our own behavior support team. And they hired their own behavior support team, and they took a baseline of resident-to-resident abuse. And after the support team came, they took it again, and they found that they reduced the incidence by 50%.
Wow.
So that's pretty, it's just anecdotal data, but there certainly is a way to go about it. And I think you've been talking about it. It's who your staff are, what the mix is, and what the skill level is in the leadership.
Can I just add something onto that then? So Ontario, actually it's not federal, it's provincial money.
Yeah.
So Ontario in this regard is way ahead of much of the rest of the country. And one of the things that I think they do so, they've been doing so well is implementing a model of assessment called the PIECES approach to assessment, and then matching that up with the behavioral supports. And it's exactly that coaching, that supporting the staff in developing their skills in the moment, that by far was what I've seen is makes a huge difference. And we're gradually getting there, but I think that's one place where Ontario is leading the way, but not everywhere, but it's patchy.
Okay. As I recall, BC did in the past have some specialized teams, and that somehow that was something that went by the wayside. Yes.
Oh, just hold on. I just want to say in response to that, because I do know we still have mental health teams, and many of them are moving their model more towards behavioral support. As we roll out the provincial algorithm related to the use of anti-psychotics and management and care for people with behavioral challenges, which has been an amazing process, actually, a very interesting collaborative process. We're trying to get everything to relate to that, and that involves the PIECES training and also how our care teams, our mental health teams work from there.
Please give us your name and then your comments.
Hi, I'm Jude Morrison, and I'm from Harrow Park Centre. And I thank you both for your comments, which are so valuable. And I would say, Elizabeth, a lot of what you said was so spot on in terms of my experiences. I guess one thing that I've been reflecting on, and I've only been at Harrow Park for 15 months, but even in that short time, that behavioral challenges are really increasing in terms of the mental health aspect of the elders that we have, and the fact that the training has not kept up. And juxtaposed on top of that is, of course, Riverview closing, and that there's just not enough support in the system, I don't think, in terms of supporting those people who have those challenges within the system. So it's, for us, on a daily basis, I just had an incident on Friday night where the staff were stuck in the nursing station by a 96-year-old woman who, became psychotic. And there was an incident between a couple of residents in that situation. And a lot of that is, that's starting to happen more and more. And I think it's because of the push in the system right now. So I think a lot of your comments, and especially the behavioral teams, are really needed to be more beefed up in our system in BC.
Hi, I'm Charmaine Spencer, and I want to thank both Lynn and Elizabeth for their wonderful presentations. There's a couple things that kind of jumped to my mind, and I wonder if maybe Elizabeth could maybe speak to it. Lynn had raised sort of the issue in terms of differences between residents in terms of aggression, and the more, what is perceived as the more well resident being reactive or causing the problem. One of the things that crosses my mind is that in some instances, the people who seem younger, healthier, may have other kinds of conditions such as frontal temporal dementia, which leads to very strong emotional reactions and disinhibition and things along that line. How well are we helping staff understand and respond appropriately to that? I know the very good work that was done with Pieces in Ontario through the Centre for Addictions and Mental Health. I know the challenges that they actually had in terms of being able to provide that training to staff, because it's a costly venture, and a lot of the time not everybody needs to know everything about it. That training at one point had actually been dropped, and then it was only after big problems explode that the training was sort of brought back on. So any suggestions from either one of you in terms of how we have some more continuity in terms of health policy, so that some strategies that we think are working can have some continuity? Thanks.
Thanks, Charmaine. The first question was, and thank you actually for bringing that up. I meant to bring my attention to that. Is it's not surprising that the people who are the perpetrators of aggression towards other elders appear more cognitively well, and most of them are most of them are people who do have more executive function difficulties, so their impulse control and frontotemporal dementia. When you meet people with frontotemporal dementia, you'll think that they actually are quite cognitively well because they're not as memory impaired as someone with an Alzheimer's disease. So they will carry out a very a comfortable conversation, but they don't, because their frontal lobes are not providing the controls over their behavior, and their lower sort of amygdala and the lower parts of the brain, they are triggered much more easily by small frustrations. So that group of people is a group we really need to be sure we know. Again, know who's moving in. If they're going to move in, what are they likely to need? Do they, are they a group of people who would do better being clustered perhaps together with people who have more expertise in that area? Or is that actually not a good idea? And I think we still have lots of questions about that. But so when I was pointing out that the sort of 30% have minimal cognitive impairment and that they have more executive dysfunction, that's the group of people who are going to feel frustrated when Mary is calling continuously from a corner, and they just don't know what to do with their frustration. And so that's when we need to be able to anticipate and sort of redirect, etc. In terms of the policy issues, I think this is the time where we actually, because of the safety issues that you pointed out, we actually need to say very clearly that we need a very organized approach to shifting the way that we provide care. We need to recognize the complexity, and we need to stop, and I didn't really understand it until I had spent this much time doing the work, but we need to stop picking up one idea and then putting it down and then picking up another idea and then putting it down. We need to just, okay, this is the plan. We do it gradually, recognizing the cost of pieces, etc. We're not going to be able to do it all at once, but how do we roll it out, and then how do we sustain it? And the only way to sustain it is to make sure that physicians are trained the same way, and our nurses and our social workers. Now, you're right, not everybody needs to know every piece of it, but we all need to know the basic approach so that we're all speaking the same language. And unfortunately, it's not just a residential care issue. The aggressive behavior that we see for older adults is even worse in acute care settings. So PIECES is equally appropriate for that environment, and that's what I'm in, at least in Vancouver Coastal, we're really advocating that PIECES be community, acute, residential. So we're all talking the same language. Wouldn't that be great?
Okay, next speaker.
Hélène Bolduc, I'm a therapeutic recreation practitioner, and I have to say I'm so excited already to hear some focus put on the need for more trained recreation staff, and more meaningful activities, and moving away from big groups of people parked in one room, and focusing more on one-to-ones and smaller groups. So this is what I wanted to say this morning. Wonderful start to what looks like it's going to be a very enlightening conference. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, go ahead. I'll do my best to answer.
I don't understand very well. What I often wonder about is at night. You go into a facility, or any of you who have worked at night, not everybody's in bed, not everybody's sleeping. People are up all night. And I'm wondering why we're not doing things like
recreation.
You as a professional might actually do some small things at night for people who are up all night.
I don't have the specifics, but I know that it is done in,
probably not.
What comes to mind is in New York. There's a program, a pilot program that's done where time is not time according to our clock and the way society runs, but time in the way that the people in the facilities live.
Like, I know there's a day hospital in Toronto, in a hospital for people with dementia, and it runs all night. And
evening programs. In the facility where I work, we have some nights that have evening programs.
Yeah.
So we're working within a system that has some parameters, and we're, like everybody else here, trying to work within those parameters and expand them, push the boundaries
But you guys are important, and you're a voice too.
And thank you for already voicing that. It's nice because it's not always recognized.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I just say too that the National Initiative for the Care of the Elderly has two what we call pocket tools, online and in your pocket, for FTD. Because most people miss
frontotemporal dementia.
Frontotemporal dementia, and they're called Dementia in the House. And they're really, really useful because people, you must know Dr. Tiffany Chow, right? At Baycrest, developed them with a social worker, and they're pretty useful to give to patients' families because they have a particularly ugly struggle with this problem.
There are some examples of the nice tools that are on the elder abuse display, but as Lynn said, there are a number of topics that are covered by the NICE project, and if you go to their website, you will find a large number of tools that cut across different areas. And so we will, during the next day and a half, try to advise you when there is one that is particularly relevant. Lynn, do you want to give the...
I just would like to just say that Alison Leaney is sitting right here in the room, and Alison Leaney did a really wonderful project for NICE on elder abuse tools, research to action, and developed them all across Canada, both in French and English, and they are very, very helpful for resident abuse as well. And I think maybe if you speak with her...
But to also give the 8 topics, the topics that NICE covers.
Oh, the topics that we cover? Oh, brother. Dementia, elder abuse, ethnicity and aging, economic security and financial literacy of older people, caregiving. How many have I done? Oh, law and the elderly. And there's about 10 to 20 tools, at least in each of those areas, some in more. There's more. Elder abuse has the most. So they're very useful. And they're not brochures. They're not brochures that, this is my opinion, they're based on evidence. We have always tried to take only evidence, put them in plain ordinary English or French so that everybody could understand. It's also international, so we have Spanish and we have Mandarin, we have another, a group of other language tools as well, if you're interested.
Okay. The gal in the green, I think, did you?
My turn?
Oh, okay.
My name is Fran Howell, and I don't work long-term care, but I live long-term care. And I just learned about this conference last week. My mom is a patient in Calgary, and I live outside of Calgary. So I just have a comment and a question. When my mom was admitted to long-term care in July of last year, when we went there, it was a very difficult situation. My mother had lived at home with me and my husband for 4 years, and we looked after her, and then she had 2 unwitnessed falls, and we were concerned about her care when these happened when we were at home. So, a long story short, she got admitted to long-term care, and it was a difficult process. I told my mom that we were going to a nursing home, and she said, I am not going to a nursing home. She did have some dementia, which has increased since she's been admitted there. Anyway, we got there, and we met the people, and they said to my mom, welcome to your new home. As we are entering my mom's room, which consisted of 1 hospital bed, a bedside table, and 1 little kitchen chair. And my mom says, this is not my home. And I turned to the lady and I said to her, I said, I just find I'm having difficulty with you saying to my mom, welcome to her new home. And I don't know if that's a standard process for people who work long-term care, is to welcome them by saying them, welcome to your new home. I don't know that. I just would like to know if there's a nicer way or a more gentle way of saying welcome to this facility. It's very difficult. And the other thing that I have difficulty with is that my mom has now been there, like I said, since July, and I can honestly say I could count on one hand how many people have referred to her by her name, which is Maggie or Michelina. They all call her Mama, and she is still confused by this. And as many times as we've said, my mom has a name, our mom has a name, can you call her Maggie? The next thing I do is I hear it Mama, and I just come unglued, and I cannot resolve that issue with them. So I just wondered if anybody could help me with and comment on those 2 issues for me, please. Thanks.
Well, there you go. The institutional model lives, right? First off, to the first question, I need to know Maggie as the person who's going to be welcoming her, to know what she needs me to call this place where she's coming to live. For some people, being welcomed into their new home would be a fabulous thing, because they would feel very welcome. But I would need to know, based on that transition piece being not that difficult to do, but just being able to know, how is she perceiving this move? What would you think would be the best way for us to welcome her into, is she seeing this as is she seeing this as a transition place, like she's coming here for a period of time? What is it that she's needing for her to feel safe and secure in the short term? It's about her. So that would be my answer. So there's not one size fits all. As soon as we try and do that, we're missing the personhood aspect of it. The second thing that you mentioned around, I don't know what it's going to take, because there's good research now actually that elder speak, this kind of mama and calling people using infantile kinds of language, actually impairs people's function and actually contributes to their behavioral unsettledness. And I don't know what, again, one of the things in the care plans that we write is, right up there, the very first thing is, I like to be called Maggie. I like to be called Mrs. Brown. And that's the standard to which we are all held accountable, me as well. I need to call her whatever is laid out in the plan that you and Maggie and the staff develop together. And when you do that, then you avoid this kind of thing. But if people also, if it is happening, then that's one of those times where a leader sits down with their staff and does regular performance reviews, but also if there is an issue, talks to them about why this is not, why we're not going to do that here, and why this is unacceptable.
I would, having lived in Calgary, I'm just dying. I would love to ask you where, but I won't. Yeah, well, we could step outside. But, is there a social worker in this home? There is. Yes. Well, I don't know if you've spoken with her or him, but I would. Number 2, is there a family council? Get on the family council. Get the family council wound up. Are you wound up? Are you really? Because what happens when it's your individual voice, there can be retribution to your mother. And so when it becomes a larger voice,
so
that's...
we are labeled a difficult family. 10 months for...
Yeah, well, that's really bad. Yeah. So what you need to do... No, that's really bad. You need to get the other people on board saying the same thing at the same time, like a choir. And then, if that doesn't work, I'm sorry, then you call the press. Well, but watch out that it isn't you per se, because you're already in trouble.
So
can... The thing about the nursing care plans,
yeah.
One thing about that is that they always say it's on the nursing care plan. I say, so who refers to the nursing care plan?
Right.
It's there. I know it's there.
Right.
Show it to me. But do you use the nursing care plan?
Clearly not.
No.
So I think
have a
that's,
meeting.
So that in itself, when we're talking about what makes for good care, is an actual plan that people actually refer to, because it makes sense, because it actually gives them useful information. Most of our traditional nursing care plans have been very formal and not very useful for me and my interactions with Maggie. So one of the things that we do is we've developed a different kind of care plan called the My Daily Care and Safety Needs. And it lays out who I am and what I need in the different areas of support that will make my day and your day work well. And it's referred to, and we're really working at getting it to be a living document that changes, as the person changes. If I could just go back to the advice around the family council. I think this is one of the challenges. Like this is a really important issue. This issue you've raised around how do, when things are difficult, how do we communicate that difficulty in a way that will honestly generate change? What are the conversations that need to happen, and how do they need to happen? Because I know one of the challenges is that family councils often become adversarial places where it's, this is all the things that are wrong with you, and then the facility says, well, these are all the difficult families, right? And it's unhelpful. I don't think it's helpful. I think what we need is to have a family council, but it's more a community council, right? Where we actually are having ongoing conversations about the challenges that exist. And we don't hide behind, you as families go off and do your thing, and we as, management do this thing. We actually have to kind of say, look, this is a difficult situation. How are we going to approach it? And I think going to the press, be very careful. be very careful, because lots of things happen in the press that you will not be wanting exposed, you would not want. Press is it's a challenging thing to do and live well afterwards. So I think I don't disagree that something has to happen.
I totally disagree with you. Nothing changes when we keep being really nice.
No, I'm not saying, and I don't. Well, I think there's a difference between being assertive and being
that's
aggressive,
what I'm talking
right?
about.
But
I'm not talking about aggression. I'm talking about being assertive. I never would have a family write a letter and sign their name in a newspaper. I would have somebody totally different writing that letter and signing it. And I'm finding that the only reason we know about resident abuse and that we're really even looking at the issue right now in this room is because of CTV. And that's because Teresa went to the media. And otherwise, we could all go back to sleep and go, oh, well, it's normal. So I feel that she really has started some social action. And then she had a walk on the legislature with lots of people who were killed in nursing homes. And guess what? Our minister was forced to come out and talk. So, you know what? It does have some role.
Oh, no,
doing it positively and not just stick with the facts.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
I'll make it brief. First of all, my name is Doug Johnson. I'm a volunteer at Fraserview Intermediate Care. Excuse me. I just want to touch on two experiences that we have at Fraserview. One is there's a group of people who are not on staff at Fraserview who are making a big impact to our residents, and that's the volunteer staff. I don't know how many people are aware that volunteers and volunteerism is extremely important at Fraserview, and the cost of them performing their duty is next to nil. Okay, so it's not a cost issue. It's just a matter of getting the right people in, getting people trained. We've talked about training and exploiting their passion for helping elders. These people are people my age who are retired, or we've got people who are high school age who are doing it through high school programs. Okay? So that's one area that I wanted to talk about. The second one, I'll also make it very quick. As far as making the whole process resident-centric instead of institution-centric, what Fraserview has done is that they've dedicated one staff person who is a professional to interview everybody when they arrive, to interview the families when they arrive, to find out what their expectations are, not what Fraserview's is, because we know what Fraserview's expectation is, but to find out what theirs is. And that same person, when they are not interviewing families coming in, they are sitting down with staff, the nursing staff, the caregiver staff, the dietitians, everybody, and homing in on concerns with individual residences. How is Mary doing? How's Margaret doing? How's so-and-so doing? And that person liaisons with everybody. It's a two-way conversation. So those are the two areas that Fraserview has addressed those particular issues. And as far as the aggression and the abuse go, yes, it is still there, but it's slowly, methodically being addressed. So
I just want to apologize. I should have definitely had comments about volunteers, because we don't engage volunteers as well as perhaps Fraserview in every facility. And we don't necessarily really go out and welcome people in and really make train them and give them the information that they need to be successful. But absolutely, we need to do that, 200, 300% more than we're doing. And so the second thing was managing expectations. That is one thing that is important, because although I very much know that we can provide care that is much more centered on who the person is. We still need to be honest about our limitations, about what we can do. So it's not to say that it can all be, everybody should expect everything to be what they want, but it's a conversation, right? It's just, as you said, it's a conversation about, what are you looking for? Here's what we can do. Where can we, find other ways to get what your mom needs, perhaps, than we can do given the resources that we have. Like, it's all about conversations.
Yes, and that's why that one person is the dedicated person.
Right. Yeah.
Granted, the rest of the staff is also doing that, but this one person,
it's her responsibility.
It's her,
and has the accountability
to make sure that it does happen. So, anyways, looking forward to the rest of the days. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay. I think we're off to a very good start. Certainly the planning committee wanted to have this session be interactive, and we also wanted to both draw awareness to the problems but also to some solutions, so that we all leave here with some information that we can implement immediately.